My name is Thomas Miller, and before ev- My name is Thomas Miller, and before everything fell apart, I believed I had lived an ordinary but beautiful life. I was born in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio, where everyone knew everyone else. My father worked as a mechanic, and my mother was a school secretary. We never had much money, but our home was always filled with laughter, homemade meals, and the belief that a person's character mattered far more than the size of their bank account. Those values stayed with me my entire life. When I was 24 years old, I met the love of my life, Margaret. She was volunteering at the local library, helping children pick out books for summer reading. I had stopped by to return a novel, and before I reached the front desk, I heard her laughing with a little boy who proudly announced he had finished his first chapter book. Her smile lit up the entire room. I found myself making excuses to visit that library again and again. Sometimes I borrowed books I had no intention of reading just to have a reason to see her. A month later, I finally gathered the courage to ask if she'd like to have dinner with me. She smiled and said, "I was beginning to wonder if you'd ever ask." That was the beginning of the greatest blessing of my life. Margaret wasn't interested in expensive gifts or fancy vacations. She loved simple things: Sunday morning pancakes, long walks through the neighborhood, watching the rain from the front porch with a cup of tea. She made every ordinary day feel special. 2 years later, we married in a small white church surrounded by family and friends. We couldn't afford a lavish honeymoon, so we spent 3 days in a quiet lakeside cabin. To us, it felt like paradise. Not long after our wedding, we bought a modest two-bedroom house at the edge of town. It wasn't much to look at. The paint was peeling. The porch leaned slightly to one side. The roof leaked every spring. Most people saw an old house. Margaret looked at me, squeezed my hand, and whispered, "This is where we'll build our future." She was right. Every spare weekend we worked side by side. I replaced broken windows. She planted flowers along the walkway. Together we painted every room. Each improvement carried a memory. By the time we finished, that little house had become our home. A few years later, our son Daniel was born. The first time I held him, he wrapped his tiny fingers around mine. At that moment, I silently promised I would spend the rest of my life protecting him. Margaret cried as she watched us together. She whispered, "Became the center of my world." I worked long hours as an electrician. The job wasn't easy. Some days I came home exhausted, my hands covered in cuts and grease. But every evening, Daniel ran to the front door shouting, "Dad's home!" No paycheck ever made me happier than hearing those words. Margaret stayed home while Daniel was young. She read him bedtime stories every night. She baked cookies after school. She never missed a baseball game or a school concert. Together, we tried to teach him the values our parents had taught us. Work hard. Treat people with kindness. For many years, it seemed those lessons had taken root. Daniel grew into a polite, hard-working young man. He even surprised us. He volunteered at food drives on our 25th wedding anniversary by recreating our wedding photo in the backyard. Margaret laughed until tears. "I don't know how he got so lucky," she said. "Neither did I." When Daniel graduated with a degree in business, we couldn't have been prouder. He found a good job in Columbus and quickly earned promotions. A few years later, he met a woman named Vanessa. She was beautiful, intelligent, and ambitious. She also had very expensive tastes. The first time Margaret met her, she smiled politely throughout dinner. But after Daniel and Vanessa left, Margaret quietly washed the dishes without saying much. Finally, she looked at me. "What do you think of her?" she asked. "I think she makes Daniel happy," I replied. Margaret nodded slowly. "I hope that's enough." "What do you mean?" She dried her hands with a kitchen towel. "I noticed she asked more questions about our house than about our family." I laughed gently. "You're worrying too much." "I hope I am." Looking back now, I wish I'd paid closer attention. After Daniel and Vanessa married, they bought a large modern home across town. They seemed successful. Daniel drove a luxury SUV. Vanessa posted glamorous vacations and expensive dinners on social media. Margaret never judged them. She simply hoped they weren't spending beyond their means. Whenever they visited, she welcomed them with warm hugs and homemade meals. Our home remained the gathering place for birthdays, Christmas mornings, and Thanksgiving dinners. Even after all those years, Daniel still called it home. Then everything changed. One chilly October morning, Margaret complained of feeling unusually tired. She insisted it was just a cold. By evening, she struggled to catch her breath. I drove her to the emergency room. Doctors rushed her inside. Hours later, a physician entered the waiting room with tears in his eyes. At that moment, before he even spoke, I knew my life would never be the same again. The doctor walked toward me with slow, careful steps. I had seen that expression before. It was the same look I had watched doctors give other families over the years, the look that tried to prepare you for words no heart is ever ready to hear. "Mr. Miller," he said softly, "I'm very sorry." The rest of his sentence blurred into the sound of my own heartbeat. Margaret was gone, just like that. After 48 years of marriage, the woman who had shared every sunrise and every storm with me was no longer there. I don't remember leaving the hospital. I don't remember driving home. The next clear memory I have is standing alone in our kitchen, staring at the 2 coffee mugs sitting beside the coffee maker. Every morning for decades, I had poured 2 cups without thinking. The next morning, I did the same thing. Only after I placed the second mug on the table did I remember. No one would drink it. I picked it up with shaking hands and poured the coffee down the sink. Then I cried harder than I had at the hospital. Grief doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in waves. Sometimes it's triggered by a photograph. Sometimes an empty chair. Sometimes by the sound of a favorite song playing in the grocery store. For me, it was the silence. Our house had always been filled with Margaret's voice. She hummed while cooking. She laughed at old television shows. She talked to the flowers in her garden as if they were old friends. Without her, every room felt hollow. The funeral brought people from every chapter of our lives, neighbors, former co-workers, church friends. Daniel stood beside me throughout the service. He hugged me tightly and whispered, "We'll get through this together, Dad." I believed him. Vanessa cried too. She held my hand and said all the right things. "If you need anything at all, we're here." I thanked her. At that moment, I believed every word. After everyone left, the house became painfully quiet again. Friends called often during the first week. Some brought casseroles, others stopped by to check on me. Little by little, those visits became less frequent. Life continued for everyone else. Mine felt frozen. Daniel visited every few days. He mowed the lawn, fixed a loose fence board, picked up groceries. One afternoon, he found me sitting on the porch, staring at Margaret's rose garden. "You haven't touched dinner, have you?" he asked. I smiled weakly. I wasn't very hungry. He sat beside me. "Dad, Mom wouldn't want you giving up." "I know. It's just hard," he nodded. "I miss her too." For a while, we simply sat together in silence. Then he said something that seemed thoughtful at the time. "You shouldn't stay alone forever." I looked at him. "This house is full of memories, I know. But memories can also hurt. I'll be all right." He didn't argue. Instead, he quietly changed the subject. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel started visiting more often. Sometimes he came alone. Other times, Vanessa came with him. She always seemed unusually interested in the house. "I forgot how spacious this place is," she said while walking through the living room. Another day, she admired the backyard. "You could build something really beautiful out here." I assumed she was simply making conversation. One afternoon, Daniel placed several papers on the kitchen table. "Dad, there are a few things we should organize." "What kind of things?" "Insurance, bank accounts, some property documents." My head still felt clouded by grief. "I don't really understand all this." "I'll help you," he assured me. "You trust me, don't you?" I smiled. "Of course I do." He pointed where I should sign. I barely looked at the pages. After all, he was my son. Why would I question him? Over the following days, he returned with more paperwork. "This is just another form. This one updates the records. This one makes things easier later." Each time I signed where he indicated. I never imagined those signatures could change my life. 3 weeks after Margaret's funeral, Daniel invited me to dinner. Vanessa prepared an expensive meal. The conversation felt forced. She kept talking about rising home prices, about investments, about how difficult the economy had become. Daniel remained unusually quiet. As I prepared to leave, Vanessa smiled politely. "You know, Thomas, you don't really need such a big house anymore." I laughed softly. "I suppose not." She leaned forward. "Have you ever thought about downsizing?" I looked toward Daniel. He stared into his coffee without saying a word. "I'm not ready," I answered honestly. "This house is all I have left of Margaret." Vanessa forced a smile. "I understand." But something in her eyes told me she didn't. The following week, Daniel called. "Dad, I'll stop by Saturday. Sounds good. I'll help you clean out the garage." Saturday arrived. He worked quietly for most of the afternoon. When we finished, he stood in the driveway looking at the house. "It's worth a lot now," he said. "I didn't build it for money. I built it for family. He nodded. Then he looked away. I didn't notice the sadness on his face. I didn't realize he was carrying a burden he wasn't ready to share. And I certainly didn't know that within days, the son I had loved, trusted, and raised would stand in this very driveway and make a decision that would shatter what remained of my heart forever. The morning everything changed began like every other morning since Margaret passed away. I woke before sunrise. For a few quiet seconds, I forgot she was gone. I reached across the bed, expecting to feel her warm hand resting beside mine. Instead, my fingers touched nothing but an empty pillow. The familiar ache settled deep inside my chest. I got out of bed, made a pot of coffee, and carried my mug onto the front porch. The autumn air was cool, and the maple tree Margaret and I had planted more than 40 years earlier had begun to lose its leaves. She loved that tree. Every fall she would stand beneath it with a rake in one hand and laugh as the wind covered the yard all over again. I smiled through my tears. "I miss you," I whispered. A little after 9 o'clock, a black SUV pulled into the driveway. Daniel stepped out first. Vanessa followed a moment later. Something felt different. Neither of them smiled. Neither greeted me with a hug. "Morning," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Morning, Dad," Daniel replied quietly. Vanessa gave me a brief nod. "We need to talk." Those 4 words made my stomach tighten. I invited them inside. The house suddenly felt colder than usual. We sat around the kitchen table where Margaret and I had shared thousands of meals. No one spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, Vanessa broke the silence. "Thomas, we've been thinking a lot about your future." I frowned. "My future?" Daniel kept staring at the table. Vanessa continued. "You shouldn't be living alone. I've managed just fine." She folded her hands. "That's not what we think." I looked at my son. "Daniel," he finally spoke. "Dad, we've made a decision." The words caught me off guard. He nodded. "We think it's time for you to move." I laughed nervously. "Move where?" Vanessa answered before Daniel could. "A senior apartment would be safer." I slowly shook my head. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm staying here." Silence filled the room. Then Daniel quietly pushed a folder across the table. "Take a look." Inside were legal documents. At first I didn't understand what I was reading. Then I saw my own signature. The deed to the house. Ownership had been transferred. I blinked several times, convinced I was misunderstanding. This can't be right." Daniel swallowed hard. "You signed the paperwork?" "No. I signed insurance forms. They were included." I looked at him in disbelief. "You told me they were routine documents." He couldn't meet my eyes. Vanessa spoke instead. "Everything was done legally." I felt my hands begin to tremble. "You tricked me." "No one tricked you," she replied firmly. "You signed willingly." "I trusted my son." The words echoed through the kitchen. Daniel closed his eyes. "I'm sorry." "No." I stood from my chair. "Sorry doesn't give me back my home." Vanessa's expression hardened. "We've already sold it." The room began spinning. What? The closing is complete. The new owners move in next week." I grabbed the edge of the table to keep from falling. "My memories. Your mother's garden. My wife's photographs." Daniel finally looked up. "We packed your things." "You packed my things?" He nodded slowly. "They're in the guest room." I rushed down the hallway. Every room looked different. Family photographs were gone. Margaret's favorite rocking chair had disappeared. Boxes lined the walls. Everything that had made the house ours had been packed away without my knowledge. I opened the bedroom closet. Half of Margaret's clothes were missing. I collapsed onto the edge of the bed. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. A few minutes later, Daniel entered quietly. "Dad," I stood. "How could you do this? We thought—" "No, you didn't think. You obeyed." He lowered his head. "It's not that simple. Then explain it." He remained silent. That silence hurt more than any answer could have. Vanessa appeared in the doorway. "The movers will arrive this afternoon." I stared at her. "So I'm expected to leave today?" "Yes." "This is unbelievable." She crossed her arms. "We've arranged everything." I looked back at Daniel. "Is this really what you want?" His eyes filled with tears. But he never answered. Instead, he picked up the small suitcase sitting beside the bedroom door. The same suitcase Margaret and I had used on countless vacations. He carried it outside. I followed him in disbelief. When I reached the front porch, he set the suitcase beside the steps. "Dad, I'm sorry." Before I could respond, Vanessa closed the front door. The lock clicked. For the first time in nearly 50 years, I was standing outside my own home. And I no longer had a key. Neighbors peeked through their windows. An elderly couple across the street watched in stunned silence. I stood frozen, unable to move. Daniel avoided my eyes. He walked toward his SUV. "Daniel!" My voice cracked. He stopped. I asked the only question that mattered. "When your mother was dying, I promised her I'd always take care of you." He covered his face with one trembling hand. Then, without turning around, he climbed into the SUV. The engine started. I watched as my only son drove away, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with one worn suitcase and a broken heart. As the vehicle disappeared around the corner, I realized something even more painful than losing my home. I'd just lost my family, and I had no idea where I was going to spend the night. I never imagined that a person could feel so empty while still standing among familiar faces and familiar places. But that afternoon, as I stood outside the house I'd built with Margaret, I felt like a ghost watching someone else's life. The front door remained locked behind me. The windows reflected the golden light of the setting sun. Everything looked exactly the same, except I was no longer part of it. I placed my suitcase down on the sidewalk and stared at the small flower garden beside the porch. Margaret had planted those flowers years ago. She used to spend hours there every spring, wearing her old gardening gloves and humming songs from her childhood. "You know," she once told me, "flowers are like people. They need love and attention to grow." I smiled sadly. She always found lessons in the smallest things. I walked closer to the garden and gently touched one of the roses. "I'm sorry, Margaret," I whispered. "I couldn't protect what we built." A tear rolled down my cheek. For the first time since Daniel left, I allowed myself to admit something painful. My son had broken my heart in a way no stranger ever could. Because betrayal hurts differently when it comes from someone you spent your entire life protecting. I remembered Daniel as a little boy running through this yard. I remembered teaching him how to ride a bicycle. I remembered holding him when he had nightmares. I remembered the day he graduated and told me, "Dad, everything I am is because of you." Those memories felt impossible to understand now. How could the same person who once hugged me so tightly be the person who left me standing on the street? I picked up my suitcase and started walking. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew I couldn't stay there. Every step away from that house felt like another piece of my old life disappearing. I walked past neighbors who had known me for decades. Some looked away. Others stared with confusion. I couldn't blame them. They had watched me live in that house for almost 50 years. They had watched Daniel grow up. They probably wondered what happened. But pride kept my mouth shut. I didn't want anyone's pity. I reached the small park at the end of the neighborhood just before sunset. Margaret and I used to come there every Sunday after church. We would sit on the same wooden bench and talk about everything. Our dreams, our worries, our future. I placed my suitcase beside me and sat down. The cold wind moved through the trees. Families walked nearby, laughing together. A father played catch with his young son. A mother pushed a child on a swing. I watched them quietly. Then I looked away, because seeing happy families reminded me of what I had lost. I stayed there until the sky turned dark. My phone remained silent. No calls from Daniel, no messages, no apology. Nothing. A part of me still hoped he would come back. Maybe he would realize his mistake. Maybe he would tell me he was sorry. Maybe he would say, "Dad, let's fix this." But deep inside I knew the man who drove away that day was not planning to return. Eventually my stomach reminded me that I hadn't eaten since morning. I walked toward the main road, carrying my suitcase. The town looked different at night. The places I had known my entire life suddenly felt unfamiliar. I passed restaurants filled with people enjoying dinner. I saw couples holding hands. I saw friends laughing over coffee. Everyone seemed to have somewhere to belong, except me. After walking for nearly an hour, I noticed a small diner with warm lights glowing through the windows. I stood outside for a moment. I almost walked away. I didn't want anyone seeing me like this. An old man with a suitcase. A man who had lost his home. A man abandoned by his own son. But hunger won. I opened the door and stepped inside. A young waitress looked up immediately. She was probably in her 20s. She smiled politely. "Good evening. Table for one." I hesitated. Then I nodded. "Yes." She noticed the suitcase in my hand, but didn't ask questions. That kindness alone meant more than she probably realized. She brought me a menu. "Take your time." I looked at the prices. "I just need something simple." She smiled. "Everyone deserves a good meal." A few minutes later, she placed a warm plate of food in front of me. I stared at it. It was just a meal. But somehow it felt like someone cared. Thank you, I said quietly. She smiled. You're welcome. I ate slowly. For the first time that day, I felt like I could breathe. After finishing, I sat there for a while, gathering the courage to figure out my next step. The waitress came back. Are you okay, sir? I looked up. The question was simple. But nobody had asked me that all day. I opened my mouth to say yes, the same lie people tell when they don't want others to see their pain. But this time, I couldn't. No, I whispered. I'm not. She pulled out the chair across from me. Do you want to talk about it? I looked at this stranger sitting in front of me. I didn't know her. She didn't know me. But somehow, telling her the truth felt easier than pretending. And for the first time since losing Margaret, I started telling my story. I'll continue the next part in the same paragraph style. The waitress listened quietly as I told her everything. I started with Margaret. I told her about the woman who had spent 48 years beside me. I told her about the little house we turned into a home. I told her about the flowers in the garden, the Sunday breakfasts, and the memories hidden in every corner. Then I told her about Daniel. The words were difficult to say. Even now, saying my own son's name felt like carrying a heavy stone in my chest. I explained how he convinced me to sign papers after Margaret died, how I trusted him because he was my son, how I never imagined those papers would take away the home I'd spent my entire life building. The waitress didn't interrupt once. She simply listened. When I finished, she looked down for a moment. I'm sorry, Mr. Miller. I forced a small smile. You don't have to call me that. She looked up. What should I call you? Thomas is fine. She smiled softly. Okay, Thomas. There was something comforting about hearing my name spoken kindly. For the first time all day, I didn't feel invisible. My name is Emily, she said. I know. She laughed quietly. I guess I introduced myself earlier. I nodded. I'm sorry. My mind hasn't been working properly today. You've been through a lot. I looked down at my hands. I keep wondering where I went wrong. Emily frowned. What do you mean? With my son. I swallowed hard. Parents spend their whole lives wondering if they did enough, if they taught the right lessons, if they gave enough love. I looked toward the window. And when your child hurts you, you start questioning everything. Emily shook her head. Thomas, someone else's choices don't erase all the love you gave. Her words surprised me, because I'd been blaming myself since the moment Daniel drove away. Maybe I'd been too trusting. Maybe I'd been too willing to believe the best in people. But Emily reminded me of something I had forgotten. Trusting someone wasn't a weakness. Betraying that trust was a choice. The diner slowly became quieter as the night went on. The last customers left. The lights above the tables became softer. Emily glanced at the clock. Do you have somewhere to stay tonight? I looked away. I didn't want to answer, but she already knew. No, I admitted. She took a deep breath. Okay. I immediately shook my head. Don't worry, I'll figure something out. I didn't say you wouldn't. But you also don't have to pretend everything is fine. I looked at her. She continued. My grandfather always told me that accepting help doesn't make someone weak. She smiled. It gives someone else the chance to do something good. I had heard similar words from Margaret many times. She always believed kindness was something people needed to share. Maybe that was why Emily's words reached me. Where would I even go? I asked. Emily thought for a moment. My uncle owns a small guest house outside town. A guest house? Yes, it's not fancy. She smiled. But it's clean and safe. I shook my head. I couldn't ask someone I don't know to help me. Emily looked at me seriously. Thomas, tonight you don't need to solve your entire life. You just need a safe place to sleep. That sentence stayed with me because she was right. I had been thinking about everything I lost. My house, my money, my family, my old life. But I had forgotten something simple. I needed somewhere safe for one night. Why are you helping me? I asked. She smiled. Because someone helped my family when we needed it. She paused. My grandfather lost everything when I was young. A stranger gave him a job and a place to stay. He always told me that kindness travels. I nodded slowly. Your grandfather sounds like a good man. He was. Emily wrote an address on a small piece of paper. Then she placed it beside my coffee cup. This is where you can go. I looked at the paper. The address represented something I hadn't felt all day. A possibility. A chance. Maybe my story wasn't over. I stood up and picked up my suitcase. Emily walked me toward the door. The cold night air hit my face again, but somehow it didn't feel as heavy as before. "Thank you," I said. She smiled. "You're welcome, Thomas." I started walking toward the parking lot. Then I stopped. I turned around. "Emily?" "Yes?" "I don't know if I'll ever be able to repay you." She shook her head. "You don't have to. Just remember this feeling someday when someone else needs help." I nodded. And for the first time since Margaret died, I felt something other than pain. I felt hope. The next morning, I arrived at the guest house address Emily had given me. It was a small cottage on the edge of town surrounded by tall trees and a quiet field. It wasn't anything like my old home. There were no memories there, no pictures on the walls, no signs of the life I had built. But it had one thing my old house no longer gave me: peace. An older man opened the door. He had grey hair, kind eyes, and a calm expression. "You must be Thomas," I nodded. "Yes, sir." He smiled. "Emily told me you needed a place to stay." I looked down. "I don't want to cause trouble." He waved his hand. "Everyone needs a little help sometimes." Those words sounded familiar, almost like something Margaret would have said. The man stepped aside. "Come in." I walked inside carrying my suitcase, and I had no idea that this small guest house, this unexpected act of kindness, would become the place where I would begin rebuilding my life. The guest house was nothing like the home I had shared with Margaret. It was smaller, quieter. The walls were plain and there were no family photographs hanging in the hallway. But as I stepped inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. I felt safe. The older man introduced himself as Robert. He was probably in his 70s, maybe a few years older than me. He had the kind of face that showed a lifetime of experiences. The wrinkles around his eyes weren't signs of weakness. They were reminders of laughter, struggles, and years spent caring about others. "Your room is down the hallway," he said. "It's nothing fancy, but it's comfortable." I nodded. "Thank you, Robert," he smiled. "And please stop thanking me every 5 minutes." I looked surprised. He laughed softly. "You're not the first person who has needed a little help." Those words caught my attention. "What do you mean?" Robert walked toward the kitchen and poured himself a cup of coffee. "Over the years, I've learned something." He looked at me. "Life has a strange way of bringing people to your door when they need it most." I sat quietly. I didn't know what to say. For most of my life, I had been the person helping others. I fixed my neighbor's broken lights. I repaired electrical problems for friends without charging them. I helped Daniel whenever he needed anything. Being the one receiving help felt uncomfortable. It made me feel like I had lost control. But maybe Robert understood that, you know, he said, placing a cup of coffee in front of me. "Accepting kindness can be harder than giving it." I looked at him. "How did you know that?" He smiled, because I struggled with it too. That answer surprised me. Robert sat across from me. "Years ago, I lost my wife." My expression softened. "I'm sorry." He nodded. "Thank you." He looked toward the window. "After she passed, I thought my life was over. I had spent decades building everything around her." His voice became quieter. "Then one day I realized something." "What?" "Love doesn't disappear when someone leaves." I listened carefully. "It changes." Robert tapped his coffee cup gently. "My wife was no longer sitting beside me, but everything she taught me was still here." I looked down, because I knew exactly what he meant. Margaret was gone. But her kindness, her patience, her love, those things were still part of me. For the first time, I wondered if losing her didn't mean losing everything. Maybe some things stayed. That afternoon, Robert showed me around the property. The guest house sat behind his main home. There was a small garden, a wooden shed, and a walking path leading toward a quiet field. "It belonged to my brother before he passed," Robert explained. "He wanted it to be a place where people could rest when life became too heavy." I looked around. "It feels peaceful," Robert smiled. "That's the idea." Over the next few days, I settled into a routine. I woke up early. I drank coffee on the porch. I walked through the field. I helped Robert with small repairs around the property. Fixing things gave me a sense of purpose. For the first time since Margaret died, my days had some structure. But even with the peaceful surroundings, the pain remained. Every night I thought about Daniel. I wondered if he regretted what he did. I wondered if he missed me. I wondered if he ever looked at the house and remembered the father who built it. One evening, while Robert and I were sitting outside, he asked a question. "Have you spoken to your son?" I shook my head. "No. Do you want to?" I stared into the distance. "I don't know." The truth was complicated. A part of me wanted to hear his voice. A part of me wanted him to say he was sorry. But another part of me was afraid that he wouldn't care, afraid that the son I loved no longer existed. I raised him to be a good man, I finally said, and I thought I knew him. Robert nodded. Sometimes people make choices that don't reflect who they used to be. I looked at him. Do you think people can change? He took a moment before answering. Everyone has the chance to change. Not everyone takes it. His words stayed with me. A week passed, then another. Slowly I began to rebuild small pieces of my life. I bought a new phone because my old one had stopped working properly. I visited the library where Margaret used to volunteer. Standing there brought back so many memories. I could almost hear her voice. I could almost see her walking between the shelves, helping children find books. The librarian recognized me immediately. Thomas, I smiled sadly. It's been a long time. She hugged me. I heard about Margaret. My eyes filled with tears. She was loved, the librarian nodded. Very much. Before I left, she handed me a small box. I think this belongs to you. I looked confused. Inside were several handwritten notes. My heart stopped. They were from Margaret. Notes she had written years ago and left at the library for me to find someday. I held the papers with shaking hands. The first note began with 4 words. My dear Thomas. And as I read her handwriting again after so many weeks, I realized Margaret had left me one final gift, a message that would change the way I saw my life forever. I sat in my small room at the guest house holding Margaret's handwritten notes in my hands. For several minutes I couldn't bring myself to open the first page. It felt impossible. A part of me was afraid that reading her words would make the pain worse, afraid that I would feel the loss all over again. But another part of me desperately wanted to hear her voice, even if it was only through ink on paper. My hands trembled as I unfolded the first note. My dear Thomas, if you are reading this, then I know life has changed in a way we never wanted. I stopped. My eyes filled with tears. She had written those words years before. She didn't know exactly when I would find them. She didn't know what my life would look like. But somehow it felt like she was sitting right beside me. The note continued. I have always believed that love is not measured by how long someone stays beside you. It is measured by the memories they leave behind and the person they help you become. I pressed the paper against my chest. That was Margaret. Even in a letter, she was still teaching me, still comforting me, still reminding me of what mattered. I continued reading. Thomas, you have spent your entire life taking care of others. You fixed broken things, you carried heavy burdens, you protected the people you loved. A tear fell onto the paper. But promise me one thing. If there ever comes a day when you need help, don't let pride stop you from accepting it. I looked around the small room. The room I had entered feeling defeated. A place I thought represented everything I had lost. But now, sitting there with Margaret's words, I saw it differently. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe this was simply a chapter I never expected. I read the final lines. Life is not the house we live in or the things we own. Life is the love we give and the kindness we leave behind. No matter what happens, never forget that you are loved. I closed my eyes. For the first time since Margaret passed away, I cried without feeling completely broken. These tears felt different. They weren't only sadness, they were gratitude. Because even after she was gone, Margaret had found a way to remind me that I still had a purpose. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual. For weeks I had been waking up wondering what I had lost. That morning I woke up wondering what I could still build. It was a small change, but sometimes the smallest changes are where healing begins. I walked outside and found Robert working in the garden. Good morning, he said. Morning, Robert. He looked at me carefully. You look different today. I smiled. I found something yesterday. He leaned on his shovel. Something good, I nodded. My wife's words, Robert smiled. She knew exactly what you needed. I looked toward the garden. She always did. Over the next few weeks, I started helping Robert more around the property. I repaired old fences. I fixed broken lights. I painted the guest house porch. It wasn't my old house. It wasn't the place where I raised Daniel, but slowly it became a place where I could breathe. One afternoon, Robert came outside carrying a newspaper. Thomas, have you seen this? I looked at him. Seen what? He handed me the paper. On the front page was an article about local real estate. My eyes moved down the page, then I froze. There was a picture of my old house, the same house where Margaret and I had spent nearly 50 years. The article mentioned the new owners. But what caught my attention was something else, a quote from Vanessa. She was talking about the house renovation plans. This property has incredible potential. We are excited to transform it into something much more valuable." I stared at those words. Something inside me hurt. Not because they were changing the house. A house was just wood and walls, but because they talked about it like it had never been a home. Like no memories had ever existed there. Like Margaret's laughter had never filled those rooms. Robert watched my face. "You okay?" I folded the newspaper. "I thought I was." He sat beside me. "Pain doesn't disappear just because we move forward." I nodded. "I know." That evening I received a phone call. I didn't recognize the number. For a moment I considered ignoring it. Then I answered. "Hello?" A woman's voice spoke. "Thomas." My heart stopped. I knew that voice. It was someone I hadn't heard in weeks. Someone I never expected to call. "Daniel's wife." Vanessa was silent for a moment. Then she whispered, "I need to talk to you." My grip tightened around the phone. After everything she had done, after everything they had taken from me, I never expected to hear fear in her voice. "What happened?" I asked. Her voice shook. "Thomas, I think we made a terrible mistake." I stood completely still. The woman who helped take away my home, the woman who convinced my son that what they did was acceptable, was now calling me for help, and I had no idea what she was about to tell me. I held the phone tightly against my ear, waiting for Vanessa to speak. For several seconds there was only silence. The woman who once stood in my kitchen and told me I needed to leave my own home now sounded completely different. She sounded scared. "Vanessa," I said quietly, "what happened?" I heard her take a shaky breath. "Thomas, I don't know where else to turn." Those words surprised me. After everything she had done, after watching her help destroy my life, a part of me wanted to hang up. A part of me wanted her to feel the same loneliness I had felt when I stood outside my house with one suitcase. But then I remembered Margaret. She always believed that holding on to anger only hurt the person carrying it. "Tell me what happened," I said. Her voice became softer. "Daniel made a mistake." I closed my eyes. "A mistake?" "Yes." I waited. "He didn't tell me everything." My heart began beating faster. "What do you mean?" Vanessa hesitated. "The house, the paperwork, everything." I stood up from my chair. "Go on." She took another breath. "When we transferred the house, Daniel told me everything was legal. He told me you understood what you were signing." I looked out the window toward the quiet field behind Robert's guest house. "And now?" Now I found out that wasn't the whole truth. My hands tightened. "What did you find?" Her voice cracked. "Daniel changed some documents before you signed them." The room became completely silent. I could hear my own heartbeat. For weeks I had wondered how my son could look me in the eyes and take away everything Margaret and I built. Now I was hearing that even Vanessa had not known the full story. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Finally, she whispered, "Because I think Daniel is in trouble." I frowned. "What kind of trouble?" "The financial kind." She explained that after buying expensive things, taking vacations, and trying to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't truly afford, Daniel had made risky decisions. He had invested money he didn't have. He had borrowed against future income. He had believed everything would continue getting better. But it didn't. And now everything was falling apart. "The house would solve everything," Vanessa said. I felt a painful feeling in my chest. My home. The place filled with my memories of Margaret. The place where Daniel grew up. It had become nothing more than a solution to a financial problem. "I can't believe this," I whispered. "I know," she replied. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Vanessa said something I never expected. "I'm sorry, Thomas." I sat down slowly. "Sorry doesn't bring back what you took." "I know." Her voice trembled. "I know I hurt you. You both did. I was selfish." Those words surprised me, because until that moment I had never heard Vanessa admit any fault. "I thought about money and comfort," she continued. "I didn't think about what that house meant to you." I looked down at my hands. The same hands that had repaired that house. The same hands that had held Daniel when he was a baby. "I need to know something," I said. "What? Did Daniel ever feel guilty?" The silence that followed answered before she did. "Yes." I looked up. "He did. He just didn't know how to admit it." I shook my head. "That doesn't excuse what he did." "No," she said quietly. "It doesn't." After we ended the call, I sat there for a long time. I didn't know what to feel. Anger, sadness, confusion, all of it mixed together. Robert found me sitting outside later that evening. "You look like you have a lot on your mind." I told him about the call. He listened carefully. When I finished, he remained quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" I looked at him. "I don't know." And that was the truth. A few weeks earlier, I wanted nothing more than for Daniel to suffer the pain he caused me. But now that the opportunity had come, I wasn't sure revenge was what I wanted. I wanted answers. I wanted him to understand what he had done. Most importantly, I wanted to know if the son I raised was still somewhere inside the man who betrayed me. The next morning, my phone rang again. This time, I recognized the number. It was Daniel. I stared at the screen for a long time. Every memory came rushing back. The little boy who called me his hero, the young man who hugged me on his wedding day, the son who left me on a sidewalk. Finally, I answered. "Hello, Daniel?" There was a long pause. Then I heard his voice, a voice filled with regret. "Dad." I closed my eyes. "I'm sorry." Two words I had waited weeks to hear, but hearing them now, after everything, I didn't know if they were enough. I sat quietly after hearing Daniel's apology. For weeks I had imagined this moment. I imagined him calling me. I imagined him admitting what he had done. I imagined him saying he was sorry, but I never imagined how complicated it would feel when it finally happened. Because forgiveness sounds simple when you are far away from the person who hurt you. But when you hear their voice again, when you remember every good moment you shared, when you remember that the person who broke your heart is also the same person you once held in your arms, nothing feels simple anymore. When you remember that didn't answer immediately, I needed him to understand that silence was not punishment, it was pain. "I know I don't deserve to ask anything from you," he continued. "You're right." My voice sounded colder than I expected. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." I looked out the window of the guest house. The morning sunlight touched the trees outside. A month ago, I would have been sitting on my front porch drinking coffee with Margaret beside me. Now I was sitting somewhere new, trying to understand how my life had changed so quickly. "Why, Daniel?" I finally asked. There was silence. "Why did you do it?" I heard him breathe heavily. "I thought I was protecting my future." I closed my eyes. "Your future?" "Yes." He sounded ashamed. "I was drowning, Dad. You should have told me." "I know." "No, Daniel," my voice cracked. "You don't know. You had a father who would have helped you. You had a family. You had someone who loved you more than anything." "I know," he whispered. "Then why did you choose to hurt me?" Another long silence. Finally, he answered. "Because I was ashamed. I didn't expect that. I made mistakes. I spent money trying to look successful. I wanted people to believe I had everything under control." His voice became weaker. But I didn't. He explained how he had hidden his financial problems from everyone. Even Vanessa. He had convinced himself that selling the house would fix everything. He told himself that I was older, that I didn't need such a big home anymore. He told himself he was making a practical decision, but deep down, he knew the truth. He had chosen money over his father. "I was selfish," he admitted. Those words hurt more than excuses would have, because for the first time Daniel wasn't defending himself. He was admitting what he had done. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said honestly. "I understand. But I need you to know something." "What?" "I spent my whole life trying to teach you that family isn't about what someone can give you. It's about being there when they need you. I failed to remember that lesson myself." Daniel started crying. "Dad!" I swallowed hard. "I don't want to spend the rest of my life carrying anger. Your mother wouldn't want that." The mention of Margaret made both of us quiet. "You're right," he whispered. "Mom always saw the best in people. She did. And I took advantage of that." I didn't answer, because it was true. A week later, Daniel came to the guest house. I stood outside watching his car approach. My heart was beating faster than I expected. When he stepped out, he looked different, not physically, but emotionally. The confidence he once carried was gone. He looked like a man who finally understood the damage he had caused. "Dad," I nodded. "Daniel." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he walked toward me. "I don't expect you to forgive me." I looked at him. "Good," he stopped. "Because forgiveness isn't something you demand. You earn it." He lowered his head. "I know." We stood there quietly. Then Daniel reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small envelope. "What is that?" He handed it to me. Inside were documents. I looked through them carefully. My eyes widened. "What did you do?" "I sold my SUV. I used the money to start fixing what I could." I stared at him. "I know it doesn't replace what I took. It never will. But I want to spend the rest of my life trying to make things right. I looked down at the papers. For the first time I saw my son again. Not the man who betrayed me, the child who once ran into my arms, the young man who needed his father's guidance. Healing didn't happen instantly. Trust didn't return overnight. Some wounds leave scars. But scars are proof that something survived. Months passed. Daniel worked hard to repair the damage he caused. He apologized to people he had hurt. He changed the way he lived. And slowly, very slowly, we began rebuilding our relationship. I never moved back into my old house. That chapter of my life belonged to Margaret and the memories we created there. Instead, I stayed at Robert's guest house and eventually helped him turn it into a place for others who needed a second chance. A place where people could rest. A place where broken hearts could begin healing. Years later, when I look back at that painful October day, I still remember the feeling of standing outside my home with one suitcase. I remember believing my life was over, but I was wrong. Losing everything forced me to discover something important. A home is not just a building. Family is not just blood. And sometimes the people who save us are the ones we never expected to meet. Margaret was right all along. Love is not measured by what we keep. It is measured by what we give. And even after losing the life I knew, I found something I never expected. A new beginning, a new purpose, and a heart that was finally ready to forgive.